This is the moment we've all been waiting for the thousands in attendance and the millions watching around the world. Let's get ready to
Welcome to the Junkyard Pod. I'm Tony Pesta, joined by Corey Walsh, and the Cleveland Cavaliers are officially streaking once again. They've kind of quietly jumped out to a 7-game win streak. It's the longest active streak in the NBA right now, and it's the third time this season that the Cavs have won 7 or more games in a row. Corey, how are you feeling about the Cavs right now over this latest stretch?
It kind of is a good summation of the season that you don't even notice a streak anymore with the Cavs, just because we would notice losing more often than anything else. Winning has become the norm this season. And I think that because they've won in such a variety of ways, I feel like they've had some good tests along the way. They haven't all necessarily been blowouts. That it's been something that even the close wins, kind of you have the nerves and agitation of a loss in a way, because we're all just spoiled at this point.
Yeah, that's the perfect way to put it. Even last night's game, which we're going to talk all about, I felt a little tense through most of the game, and that's one of the only times all season that we've had a truly close and competitive game against a team that is a pretty good team in Memphis. Like, we've had close games against Brooklyn and Washington and Detroit, but we felt like we should be able to overcome that. Against Memphis, I was actually worried for a while there, but overall, I mean, like you said, it's crazy. A 7-game win streak, and we hardly even noticed. I don't even think I've seen anybody tweet out that we're on a 7-game win streak. That's why I said it feels a little quiet almost, but it is the longest streak in the NBA right now. And the Cavs, who would have thought? They're pretty good at basketball. So we're gonna recap their latest win over the Grizzlies. But before we start, let me remind everyone, you can find the Junkyard Pod on Apple, Spotify, and YouTube. If you enjoyed this show and you want to help us out, then make sure you're following us on all of those platforms, and make sure you check us out on Playback as well. Playback.tv/Fear the Sword. We do live NBA watch parties. And finally, follow me on TikTok for short form clips of all of our content. And all right, so I want to start with the general feel of last night's game, because at times it kind of felt like a rock fight. It really felt like the Cavs through different stretches were just dragging through the mud, because they shot 27% from deep on 44 attempts. That's actually the third worst three-point shooting night they've had this year. So when you have that mixed in with a bunch of fouls in the third quarter, the game just kind of turned into a slugfest. But then you look at the final score, and it says 129 points. And you're like, whoa, okay, what happened there? I felt like this game was an old-fashioned rock fight. But when I wrote my grades for last night, I mentioned it felt like we saw remnants of the past Cavs teams, where they can't buy a bucket from deep, but they just kind of gut it out by scoring in the paint and banking on their defense. And so we saw that last night a little bit, but we also saw how far the team has grown, because they put up 129 points on a game that felt like an off night. Again, third worst three-point shooting game of the year, but they made up for it with a season-high 22 offensive rebounds, and they end the night scoring 129 points, which is something they only did a handful of times last year, even at their best. So what was your general feel of that game?
It definitely was a playoff atmosphere last night for sure. Let's go off your point. I was kind of comparing it to the Orlando series last year, especially with the shooting splits. If this was the Cavs, or if the Cavs from that series played against this Memphis team in this game and was playing like at halftime with the similar stats we saw, where, like you said, they couldn't buy a basket, their perimeter shot wasn't falling, that Cavs team would have collapsed. Like, the only reason they kind of got out of that Orlando series was also because the Magic couldn't shoot threes in that series either. And I mean, the Magic can't score threes now either, but the Cavs, they dominated the offensive glass. A lot of their points were on second chance opportunities. I feel like that was something where you didn't really see that in the Orlando series. You didn't see something where Mobley kind of really took over the game. I think we talked a lot about how he played against the Knicks. To me, this game was more impressive than the Knicks game was, because it was something where the Cavs and the Grizzlies were kind of just like trading blows. It wasn't like with the Knicks game where after the first quarter it was over pretty much, and you could kind of see Mobley coast with the offense. This was something where I feel like Mobley, while like point wise he didn't necessarily have a dominant game, it was something where I feel like he kind of rose the team's level. It was something where they kind of rose up with him. He buoyed everyone else. It wasn't Donovan, please save us type of game, or where Donovan Mitchell goes out and just like explodes in the first quarter, then everyone kind of goes behind him. So like you said, this was a real testament of growth. It's something where even as far as last season's postseason, games where the Cavs weren't knocking down their threes, it kind of just felt like they were scrambling offensively. They really always turned to Donovan, wanted him to bail them out. But this was something where they had a lot of different solutions that they frankly didn't have last year.
Yeah, I think the Cavs, you mentioned like Mobley stepping up and the fact that Mitchell didn't have to kind of go one-man army. That's a huge change from last season. And again, even I know I mentioned that it felt like a rock fight, but the thing is, even though they were shooting so poorly from three, again, 27%, like very, very bad shooting night, I never got the sense that like this Cavs team couldn't figure out a way to score. Like I did feel pretty confident that they were going to get a bucket every trip down still. Whereas in years past, when they weren't shooting the ball well from three, it felt almost hopeless. You're like, oh man, where are they even going to get, a bucket from if it's not Donovan Mitchell doing it all on his own, or Darius Garland, snapping into it or something. It just never felt like that. Yesterday, even though they shot poorly, I still felt like, all right, you can give Mobley the ball, let him create something. We're going to talk about Jerome and other players too, but like the offense never felt like it was really hopeless. And that's a good thing, especially on a night where, again, they shot so poorly. And yeah, just gutting it out on the offensive glass too. Another thing, like in years past, the Cavs, they haven't really been the best rebounding team, but to take it to the Grizzlies like that and just pound them on the offensive glass and manage to get yourself up to 129 points, it was the difference maker. And so I think we both agree that Evan Mobley was pretty awesome last night. So I want to transition us to talk about maybe the story of the game entering it. Is the battle for Defensive Player of the Year. Now, this game isn't going to decide it or anything, but Jaren Jackson Jr. and Evan Mobley have become the two favorites to win the award after the unfortunate Victor Wembanyama news. So we got a one-on-one showdown between the two favorites last night. And what I thought was really interesting is that entering the game, when we started the playback stream, I said there are two things that I think Mobley has the advantage in this race, two things that give Mobley the edge over Jaren Jackson Jr. because they're both having phenomenal seasons. Both of them are very deserving of the award. But if you're trying to find where one of them has, an advantage, Mobley is a better rebounder, and he manages to play defense without fouling. And I can't imagine a better game for both of those agendas than what we got last night. What were your thoughts on the battle between Mobley and Jackson?
I feel like you said it's a very the awards campaign in general is something that's so like narrative based, I feel like, in today's age. So the biggest narrative overall is this is probably the last Defensive Player of the Year race that won't go to Wembanyama for at least 8 of the next 10 years.
Yeah.
So if Mobley was ever going to add this to his trophy case, this is the season to kind of capitalize on it. And Jackson, I believe he won the award like 2 years ago, right?
Yeah, 2023, he won it. Brooke Lopez was second, and Evan Mobley was third that year, I believe.
Yeah, and then like we're seeing a lot of stuff with like award fatigue. It was popular with the whole NFL MVP discussion. It's popular even when Jokic won over Embiid. It was what are the voters going to decide? Where it's like, will you just get sick of giving it to someone who's already had it? Now, there's a lot of reasons that I feel like Mobley has momentum in this way, and that's because even though I think Vegas still has him as the number, Jaren Jackson Jr. as the favorite still.
They adjusted it. They adjusted it. They're both tied now, so they're even.
Oh, so Vegas noticed the last night's game, I guess. Yeah, because I think the Cavs, obviously, they're ultra dominant. Evan Mobley is a big talking point in the Cavs leap. I think that goes to his advantage. I think there's a lot of negative discourse for how good of a defender Jaren Jackson is. The fouling is something that has been what's plagued him in his career to this point, because it gets to a point of a game where you have to sub him out halfway through the second quarter because he already has 3 fouls. And it's not like he does well. He gets blocks for a fair amount, but the block to foul ratio is definitely not in Jaren Jackson's favor. He's a disruptive defender. He's not a strong rebounder, like you said. And overall, like Memphis's defense, I wouldn't say the identity of the Memphis Grizzlies this year is their defense. I think it's that they've had a lot of new names kind of rise up and help that team become more balanced. I think it's a balanced attack on both ends for the Memphis Grizzlies, and the defense starts and ends with Evan Mobley and Jarrett Allen. But in the case of this award, I don't think Jarrett Allen's necessarily going to be a detractor for Evan Mobley. And we saw that last night too. Mobley's fingerprints were all over that game. Jaren Jackson's were much less. I think the whole rebounding discussion that we talked about, why the Cavs are dominating second chance opportunities, it wasn't in the minutes that Jaren Jackson wasn't on the floor. And it's not like the Memphis Grizzlies don't have height. Aldama and Jackson were on the floor for like a bulk of the game last night, and so were Jarrett and Evan, and the Cavs were out rebounding them at a pretty fair clip. If the Cavs didn't get the rebounds that they did, I think Memphis would have honestly won that game, and a lot of that comes to Evan Mobley's presence defensively.
Definitely. And I think it's something that you mentioned earlier on there is that like defensive player of the year, most of the awards are narrative driven. With up until a week ago, the narrative was, well, Victor Wembanyama's going to win his first one. He was running away with the award, and now he's off the board. And we're kind of scrambling to figure out what is the narrative going to be between Jaren Jackson Jr. and Evan Mobley. Those two guys have kind of emerged as the favorites. I'd be shocked if anybody else won it, but you never know. The narratives, though, if they're starting to form, like you said, Vegas took notice. Jaren Jackson Jr. was slightly ahead of him. Now it's tied. Yesterday, I mentioned the two big things. It's the rebounding and the fouling. So Jaren Jackson last night finished with just 3 rebounds as his team was getting blasted on the glass. All he could do was grab 3. And in a close game, he only was able to play 25 minutes because you guessed it, he was in foul trouble. The dude he's perpetually in foul trouble. He averages, I think, 3.6 fouls per game. And the thing is, when he won Defensive Player of the Year 2 years ago, he was leading the league in blocks. He was blocking like 3 shots a game. The counting stats were crazy. This year, I think it's 1.7 a game. So it's not that crazy. He's not leading the NBA in blocks anymore. The counting stats are way down. In this game against the Cavs, he picked up 4 fouls pretty early. And then he got his 5th foul at a key moment in the 4th quarter. The only person who was fouling more often than Jaren Jackson Jr. last night was Sam Merrill. For some reason, he picked up, I don't know if you saw this, Sam Merrill picked up 4 fouls in 2 minutes. And it's not, it was a rough
stretch for Merrill.
Yeah. I don't know what got into him last night. Some of them were kind of ticky-tack fouls, but literally it was like offensive foul, loose ball foul, offensive foul, shooting foul. It was crazy, but he was the only one who was out fouling Jaren Jackson Jr. But Jackson, he couldn't anchor the Grizzlies defense. He either wasn't on the floor because of that foul trouble, or when he was on the floor, he wasn't grabbing any rebounds. And you mentioned Mobley, his fingerprints all over the game. He finished with 25 points, 13 rebounds, 8 assists, and 3 blocks. There's only been 3 games this season with that stat line. It's Mobley, Giannis, and Wemby who have done it. So I thought Mobley was super aggressive all game, just like he has been the last few weeks. He schooled Jaren Jackson on both ends of the floor. We all saw the crossover and the Euro step on his way to the rim. And again, as far as the narratives go, I think the dominoes are starting to fall because the odds are dead even for Defensive Player of the Year now. I think the narrative is forming, and we're here to make sure that we push as much Mobley propaganda as possible because he definitely deserves this award before Wemby wins the next 8 in a row. We got to get Mobley the one that's available right now.
Yeah, and I feel like as long as the Cavs are kind of in the driver's seat in the East and they're winning games and the fashion that they're winning now, it only will further buoy Mobley's case. I think with the Thunder being as dominant as they are in the West too, it's going to be really hard for Memphis to kind of stick out in that kind of way. I think the narratives that have been going along all season have really been only centered around 4 or 5 teams. And I don't think Memphis has really been in that discussion whatsoever. I think Houston is more discussed nationally, than the Grizzlies are. So, and the Cavs have been the media darling of this season. Them and the Thunder, I feel like, are discussed more often positively than anyone else. So that again just proves that the campaign for Mobley is going to be as strong as it's ever been.
Yeah, and it definitely helps. Like I've seen like Stephen A. Smith is saying a lot of great things about the Cavs. I think even Kendrick Perkins has, like a lot of the mainstream national media guys. Yeah, not that I watch them personally, but I've seen on Twitter the clips and everything. Like they're getting a lot of love. So Evan Mobley for Defensive Player of the Year. We're going to push it all season long. But moving along to another guy who honestly should probably get more recognition for a couple awards, if not Sixth Man of the Year, Most Improved, something. He's unlikely to win either, but we got to do the daily Ty Jerome segment because this dude just cannot stop winning. He had 26 points in 22 minutes last night. He said no Darius Garland, no problem. I said on the playback stream, Ty Jerome started off pretty slow. He actually got into foul trouble early on. I think he had 3 fouls in the first quarter. And so I was like, you know what, Cavs fans, we can't expect Jerome to score 20 points in 20 minutes every night. That's just unreasonable. We shouldn't expect it. And then he went and scored 15 points in the fourth quarter. And it was the Ty Jerome show all over again. I really don't have anything new to say. He's just having one of the most like miraculous breakout seasons that honestly we've ever seen because it's so unexpected. And if you've been reading Jackson Flickinger, not Jaren Jackson Jr. this time, Jackson Flickinger, if you've been reading his work on Fear the Sword, you'll see that basically no one saw this coming. Kenny Atkinson, his teammates, none of them thought Ty Jerome had it in him. Only Ty Jerome and maybe Colby Altman predicted this, and it's just been unreal. The dude is hyper efficient. Every time he comes into the game, he's making a difference. And I said this on the last episode, but it's almost March. He's still doing it. This isn't a hot streak at the start of the season. This has been a prolonged stretch of Ty Jerome just being instant offense off the bench.
We're past the theory of will Ty Jerome be good in months that don't end in Burr.
Yeah, he's shattered that narrative.
I feel like it's raised 2 questions for me, Ty Jerome's momentum at this point, because you can't say it's a flash in the pan because it's been so continuous throughout the whole season. But then it raises the question of, is Ty Jerome going to be able to do this with postseason level defense where teams can prepare and take away the things he does best? We've talked about how he takes the most difficult shots in the league from a metric standpoint and makes them at an insane amount of efficiency. But then also playoff defense is so different. I feel like Ty Jerome, he makes a lot of tough shots, but I feel like when he gets blitzed by defenses in the postseason versus teams kind of being like, well, Ty Jerome won't do that against us. He's Ty Jerome. And then they kind of figure out halfway through the game that he can do that against you. What is it going to look like in postseason basketball for Ty Jerome? Is it going to be more selective when he gets played, or do you fully believe, based on what we've seen, that Ty Jerome can be a high impact, because I think worst case scenario right now, I think he could be Peyton Pritchard for the Cavs, where there's a series for the Celtics where Peyton Pritchard, like the Cavs saw it, like he can swing possessions in a row when he's out there. He doesn't need to play a ton of minutes. Or is he going to be like turned into, not obviously skill level wise, but a Duncan Robinson type, where when the shot's not falling, it's like, what are you getting out of Ty Jerome anymore? But obviously the skill sets are different, but I more mean from the make or miss aspect of him shooting. So what do you think of Ty Jerome for postseason play?
Yeah, I mean, I said it all year. I was like, the numbers are going to come down eventually. The shooting efficiency, so far they haven't, but I'm still holding out. Like he's not going to keep shooting in the 100th percentile on this degree of difficulty shots. Like you have to imagine there's going to be a come to earth moment. Hopefully that doesn't happen in the playoffs, but if it does, to me, the things that he'll need to hang his hat on, I'm not saying it'll happen or not, but the things that he'll have to do is be a playmaker, which he's shown that he's able to do this season, and be impactful on defense. He is 6'5", so he's got some size. He's been very ferocious on defense. Like he plays super physical. I'm surprised he doesn't get into foul trouble more often with the way that he attacks the ball. And so even if he's not scoring, if he's able to do those things, I still think he'll be able to break even at worst in the playoffs. But yeah, I mean, the dude, when he's scoring like this, it's hard not to feel encouraged. But the playoffs are going to be the big test for him because, doing it in the regular season is awesome. And like I said, it's one of the coolest, kind of most unexpected breakouts we've seen in a while. But it's all going to come down to can he do it in the playoffs? And so I feel encouraged just because he's done it for so long at this point. It's been such a prolonged stretch of Ty Jerome just finding ways to be productive that I think he'll be able to do it in the playoffs too. And the other thing that helps is that he's not alone on the bench. He has his best friend, DeAndre Hunter, who can carry some of the load as well. So if Ty Jerome doesn't have it going, maybe it's DeAndre Hunter that gets going, or maybe it's Sam Merrill or, Javonte Green probably won't get going on offense, but there's more options there to turn to, basically, is what I'm saying. Like, if Ty Jerome doesn't have it, maybe you turn to someone else. And that's just a luxury that the Cavs haven't had in years past.
Yeah, and then it raises, like, the second question I have is kind of two-pronged. Has Ty Jerome played himself out of a contract with the Cavs next season based on the run he's on? And if he has played himself out of Cleveland, will the success translate? Because now I'm, like, in a question of, like, obviously a lot of this can be contributed to Ty Jerome, but how much of it can also be contributed to the offense that he's currently in with the staff as well? Because we haven't seen this anywhere else. So it raises questions of what really has changed. Has Ty Jerome taken this massive leap all on his own, or is it just also a product of everything around him?
I have no idea what's going to happen as far as his contract situation goes. I know that Fear of the Fro and I think real Cavs fans have both done breakdowns of like how we could retain him. And I think that, I don't know the number off the top of my head. I'll have to look it up and I'll try to put it on screen here after we're done recording. But I think they'll be able to re-sign him for like a fairly reasonable deal. They won't be able to give him a crazy bag, but they won't be able to, they won't like completely undersell him either. As long as Dan Gilbert's willing to pay the price, they are able to get him. And it kind of comes down to what is Ty Jerome going to want to do? Because, he could take a big bag and go somewhere else, but is he going to be as successful in another place?
We have his best friend.
I was going to say, we have his best friend. He seems to it's not even just DeAndre Hunter. He seems to get along with everyone on this roster. So it's like, for a guy who just a year ago was kind of like, I mean, he's making what, $2.5 million this year? Like, he was barely in the NBA. He's been a fringe NBA guy for his entire career. Is he going to leave this kind of dreamlike situation where he just had a breakout year to go make a little extra money somewhere else? I mean, he's already going to get a pretty big bag in the summer regardless. I think the Cavs are able to offer him a pretty decent contract. Again, I'll put that number on screen because I don't have it off the top of my head. But I mean, I'm hoping for the best. I hope that, because you said it, like, is he going to be able to replicate that success somewhere else? I'm sure he believes he can, but he's already proven he can do it here. So why not keep it rolling, especially if we're competing for a championship, or even if we bring it home, right? Like that adds a little bit more incentive for him to stay here.
Now the question has to be asked, though. Did the Cavs trade for DeAndre Hunter solely to try to sway Ty Jerome to stay around? Was this a Luol Deng for Kyrie Irving type ordeal that the Cavs have pulled? They're just making all the moves. You can't leave.
Plans on top of plans, Kobe Altman, securing every single timeline right there, making sure that Ty has no reason to leave. Honestly, 200 IQ right there, if that's the truth. So I love
it didn't
that.
work out with the wall, but so hopefully it works for Ty.
Hopefully second time's the charm there. All right, I have two more notes real quick. Two other things that I noticed during the game. The first one that I want to look at is Donovan Mitchell. I thought he played pretty great last night. Again, it wasn't like a one-man army Donovan Mitchell show. I think Mobley was the best player on the floor. But Mitchell played really good too. And the reason why I want to bring this up, and specifically a clutch time possession, is because I looked at the minutes played. And so this was only the 10th time all season that Donovan Mitchell has played 35 plus minutes in a game. I think he played 36. It's only the 10th time that he's done that. So for perspective, last season, he averaged 35 minutes a game. So Kenny Atkinson, we've talked about it throughout the year. He has dramatically decreased the load that Mitchell and everyone else is carrying on a nightly basis. And this was important, and it showed itself last night because Mitchell was fresh for the closing minutes. There's 30 seconds left. The Cavs were up by 3. Donovan Mitchell had the ball. And I think in years past, we all know what's coming. It's that step back 3, or maybe like a pull-up mid-range jumper, but he's rarely getting all the way to the basket at the end of games because the dude was just gassed at that point. But this time, because Kenny has kept him fresh, Mitchell actually doesn't settle. He goes all the way to the rim. draws a foul, gets to the free throw line, and he split the free throws, which we'll have to talk about at some point. My man keeps missing free throws recently. I think he missed like 4 or 5 of them
on the season. That's it feels crazy low for him. I don't know his career number off the top of my head, but it feels like even in the past month, this Cavs team has never been a strong free throw shooting team, and it just feels like it's nosedived.
Yeah, he's been missing a ton. And again, I think he missed 4 or 5 last night. So free throws aside, I thought Mitchell was fantastic throughout that entire game. And at the end of the game, especially because Kenny Atkinson has managed to keep his minutes down, I think that definitely played a role in him getting all the way to the rim and drawing the foul, which is going to be important come playoff time to keep everyone on the roster fresh, but especially Donovan Mitchell, who in years past was just carrying a Herculean load. And now the team is really just more well distributed, and he doesn't have to do it all on his own anymore. Even last night, with no Darius Garland, he didn't have to do it all on his own. He got 25 from Mobley and 26 from Jerome. So just huge contributions from everyone, helping Donovan Mitchell assert himself at the right times.
Yeah, it feels like the greatest litmus test that the league could have at this point for minutes played is kind of compare how the Cavs look in the postseason versus how the Knicks look. They're on like two completely bipolar or polar opposite mentalities as a team. It's like one team is just like, I'm going to play 38 plus minutes for my starters. And then there's the Cavs who are like, I hope we don't have to play 30 minutes for our starters. It's just, it's going to be super interesting. And obviously with a team that has had as poor injury luck as the Cavs have had over the past few seasons, you hope it kind of works out. And it really has, honestly. There's been like a few stretches where players have gone down, but none of it really seems like it's fatigue. It's more just freak accidents than anything else.
Yeah, and we've seen the last like 3 seasons where the Cavs post All-Star break, they just kind of the wheels fall off and it feels like everyone's just limping to the finish line. This year, I'm feeling like that won't be the case. You never know, knock on wood, everything. I don't want to jinx it, but the minutes are way down, and they've kind of like re-upped at the deadline, which they haven't done in a few years, getting DeAndre Hunter and Javonte Green, who is officially on the roster now, 2 added depth pieces that should hopefully make a difference as they move down the stretch to playoff time. But I have one final note here, and then feel free if you have any other takes to fill them in here at the end. But got to talk about DeAndre Hunter because his size just continues to stand out on this roster. He didn't shoot the ball very well last game. No one on the Cavs did. And also, I forgot to mention this, but the Cavs, they shot whatever horrible percentage from the 3-point line, but they had 3 shots where their foot was on the line. So as deep 2-pointers that you could possibly get, 3 of them, which really would have helped. And I think Max Strus stepped out of bounds in the corner on another one that may have gone in. So it was worse. It was worse than it looked probably. If they could have just taken a little tiny step back behind the line, that number would have been a bit better. But DeAndre Hunter, he didn't shoot the ball that well last night, but he did have a few drives to the hoop that I wanted to talk about because he just gets his defender locked onto his hip and kind of walks them down into the lane and then converts the floater. He did it twice last night. I've noticed that he uses his body really well. And on those plays, all he's really doing is eliminating his defender by keeping them on his hip and then occupying the help defense just long enough for him to make a read. And his patience with the ball really stood out to me yesterday. And again, we keep seeing him rise over smaller defenders to shoot jump shots, and it's really sweet to see. And then the last thing with Hunter, the rebounding. This is something that he's never really excelled at, despite having all the physical tools that you think a good rebounder would have. He just kind of hasn't put it together. He hasn't really been a great rebounder at any point. Even his first few games in Cleveland, he wasn't rebounding. He had 10 total rebounds in his first 4 games with the Cavs. Last night, he grabbed 8 rebounds. And so 8 rebounds in a game, that's something Hunter's only done 2 other times this season. So it's a small step in the right direction. It's only 1 game. He's got to keep it up, but it's something that I'm going to keep an eye on because obviously help on the glass is something that the Cavs have always needed. And Hunter, like I said, he has the tools to make a contribution there. So I was happy to finally see it. We got to see it a little bit more often, but 8 rebounds last night. Great to see. Corey, how do you feel about Hunter in the last few games?
Yeah, I hate to be the guy constantly banging the drum here, but I've seen enough. Like, I want DeAndre Hunter to start. I think he has proven that he's more dynamic than Max Strus. Not that Max Strus is one note. because obviously he's a good facilitator. He tries hard on defense, but there's just a difference between what I think Hunter brings to the Cavs with their core four versus what I think Strus does. And I think if the Cavs really want to get out to strong starts in games, yeah, it's nice that DeAndre Hunter can be that player off the bench for you. But I think for all the reasons that you said, I mean, his defensive presence is a lot stronger, I think, than Max Strus is. He's a good rebounder. Not that I need Max Strus to be a good rebounder, but when you play him at the three, I mean, you hope he'll corral some, and I don't really see situations in which that's going to happen. I think the way I feel about Hunter's shot is similarly enough to how I feel about Strus's, so I don't worry about the shot discrepancy anymore. It's kind of like whatever style you want, and I think that for the Cavs to make the strongest foot forward going forward for the rest of the season, I think DeAndre Hunter should be the starter. And I know I don't want every episode to kind of be like, I think Hunter should start, because like at some point I'm just going to give up and realize it's not happening. But I think it's obvious to everyone who's watching how dynamic Hunter has been, even when the shot isn't like at the levels that it was in Atlanta. And that could be as simple as that there's not as many shots to go around as there was in Atlanta either. It's not that he probably has lost a step. It's also that, hey, you know, the Cavs are an offensive juggernaut and there's shots that have to go everywhere else. It's not you competing with Reese Shea, Dyson Daniels, and if Trae Young decides not to shoot 20 times.
Yeah. Now, I agree with you. I mean, like, we can push it all we want, because DeAndre Hunter, he should be the starter. Again, this is coming from a huge Max Strus defender. The reality is DeAndre Hunter, he's your fifth best player probably. I know Jerome has been amazing and everything, but like, he's probably the fifth best player on the team. He should start. He fits in perfectly. He's a small forward. They need a small forward. They've needed a small forward for like 4 years now. You just start the guy. And I think it helps that Okoro is healthy, Dean Wade is healthy, and again, I mentioned Javonte Green a bunch, but that's three guys who can all give you the athleticism, some of the size, and not as much of the shot making on the bench, but they can base, because like I know DeAndre Hunter off the bench is great because you get the 3-level scoring. He's not great at attacking the rim, but you know what I mean, and the defense and the size, like that's why you want it on the bench. But with Dean Wade, Okoro, and Javonte Green, they can do all that kind of, by committee. So just start Hunter. Max Strus and Ty Jerome are the backup guards. Wade, Okoro, and Green fill in the rest, and that's one hell of a rotation. So I'm right there with you. I think we should keep pushing it. Again, I said it last episode. None of that is meant to be like Max Strus sucks, he shouldn't start. Yeah. Max Strus is very helpful to this team.
It's like the farthest thing that we're both thinking. It's just you don't have a player like DeAndre Hunter in the postseason and be like, oh, we're only going to play him like 20 minutes a game. If you're going to split the minutes even between Max Strus and DeAndre Hunter, start DeAndre Hunter. It's if you leave DeAndre Hunter on your bench, it's like, because yes, he's a good defender. Why would you leave your most dynamic wing defender on the bench in a postseason series to start games, especially as you head into the later rounds and you play teams like the Knicks and the Celtics who have good wings? You wouldn't be like, all right, well, we're going to let Tatum kind of do what he wants for the first 8 minutes. But then when we put DeAndre Hunter in and Tatum gets subbed out, that's when the difference will really take place. Like, just start with your best players. You don't want to overcomplicate it. And I feel like right now they're trying to get too cute with their minutes.
Yeah, I mean, basically any way you cut it up, like stylistically, Hunter makes more sense. Who's the better player? I think DeAndre Hunter is the better individual player. He's probably a better shooter, better defender. So the only thing, I guess I'll just say this to try and, give both sides the argument for anyone who's still on the start Max Strus island. I guess the vision there is that you have three guys who can pass, dribble, and shoot. DeAndre Hunter, not much of a playmaker. So if you have Strus, Mitchell, and Garland out there, the offense is free-flowing. You got three guys creating for the two bigs. Mobley doing a little bit of creation. With Hunter out there, maybe you worry that you have three guys who aren't super great at creating for others. And so maybe that's the argument there. But again, I think just stylistically, it still makes more sense. Like, I would rather have Hunter's defense and the three-point shooting and the potential rebounding versus like the extra connective playmaking that Strus brings. Because again, and I think this, I don't want to talk in circles, but you'll still be able to play Strus the same amount of minutes. If you need Strus out there, guess what? You can just pivot to having Strus close the game then, if that's the issue. But I think starting games with DeAndre Hunter, especially in the playoff context, it makes sense because Max Strus, he's a good defender, but you're asking too much of him to guard Jason Tatum or Jaylen Brown. Whereas DeAndre Hunter, you were built in a lab to defend those guys. That is your calling card. You got to rise to the occasion and do it, but that's your calling card. Max Strus, go ahead, guard Peyton Pritchard. Help Ty Jerome win that battle. I'm fine with that. But so, yeah, I agree with you. I think DeAndre Hunter should start.
Yeah, and if we're talking about postseason basketball too, just from like a symmetry standpoint, like the obvious outlier for the Cavs is they have a short front court or back court. And you know how you cover that up? You make your lineup taller. You know how you make your lineup taller? You put, I think DeAndre Hunter's 6'8", right? You put DeAndre Hunter.
Yeah, around there. 6'7", 6'8". I'm not sure.
There. He's taller than Max Strus. You're kind of eliminating, you're really helping your biggest weakness defensively by having him in there. So even if you want to just like remove all skill set from the equation, that is the most obvious reason, because you're in the postseason, that's where defenses are going to go. And then if you have Max Strus out there, for as much as Max Strus tries, they're going to go that way too, because Max Strus can only handle a certain amount from an offense. And it's like, you just don't want to be in a situation where you're just ignoring a solution just because you want continuity to stick. Because you know how you get continuity? You try it now.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. And I don't remember, just last note here, I don't remember if we said it on the pod or if it was on our playback stream, but I think you asked, like, what point in the year would I just give up on Kenny starting Hunter? Like, at what point do I think it's just not going to happen? And I believe I said, like, mid-March. So if we get to the middle of March and Strus is still the starter, I would say Kenny's probably riding that Strus train all the way through the season, and maybe he'll end up pivoting in the playoffs. But so if anyone in the comments is wondering, like, when is he going to do it? When is he going to do it? I'm going to say mid-March, because it does make sense. Like, Hunter, he did just get to the team, so I'll try and give Kenny some benefit of the doubt there. Maybe they're just trying to get Hunter, acclimated and everything, and you don't want to throw a wrench in there when the Cavs are on a 7-game win streak. So maybe that's it. But yeah, if we get to mid-March and Strus is still starting, I'll probably wave the white flag and say I did. Well, I won't wave the white flag, actually. I'll still be pushing for Hunter to start, but I will probably lose hope on that happening. So that's the target date that I have for whether or not Kenny's going to make the switch. But that's going to do it for this episode of the Junkyard Pod. Thank you to everyone for watching or listening. If you enjoyed the show, please leave a like, drop a comment, let us know who you think should start. Make sure you're following us on all of our social media platforms. It really does help, and we appreciate it. With all that being said, go Cavs.
I agree. Go Cavs. Brian, push the Hunter narrative. You're the only one that could save us.